Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host as always, Alex, and with me tonight I have Logan.
Good evening, Alex. Everybody.
It's been a bit of a mixed bag of results the last couple of days. We obviously got the pretty good win against Burton, which we'll talk about first, but then a pretty disappointing result against Wolves, and obviously a lot of negative fallout from that one as well with the injury to Hernandez. But we'll start on the positive note, and we'll talk about that Burton result. And we talked about it last week and talked about the possibility that we'd kind of go out there and get a pretty decent result as that sort of small club comes to the KCOM and we can really sort of get going and really show what we're made of. And Hernandez managed to get his hat trick along with Grzycki getting his first goal for the club. So how did you see that one, Logan?
Yeah, it seemed initially that Burton had turned up, as you said, and really were up for the contest. I don't think there was too much to kind of split us in the first half, even though we probably would argue that we were the better side. And I think that obviously with Jackson Irving being close to our hearts in the form of being a Socceroo, when he scored, I thought it was somewhat fate and it was bound to happen. But then when he turned from hero to villain and got himself sent off, I think that there was an obvious momentum shift, and we were able to see the Tigers flex their muscle and obviously come over the top quite emphatically in the end. And as you mentioned, to see Hernandez in that rich vein of form was promising signs, and until obviously the later news when he got injured against Wolverhampton, which looks to be a very serious one.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate one. Clough, after the game, had a bit to say about the refs, which I suppose most managers want to do, especially after a big loss like that. But I thought his comments about the Irvine sending off were a bit off. I thought it was probably a pretty deserved second yellow card. You see those sorts of yellow cards given quite often when a player's on the break, the team's counter-attacking, and a pretty cynical foul takes him down.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that you could kind of tell by the look on Irving's face when he stood up that he was disappointed with the timing of the challenge. And whilst I don't think it was too malicious, it was certainly one that was mistimed and did have a kind of a serious tone to it. So I think it was the right result. And I can understand why Clough was aggrieved, but I don't think the referee made a mistake with issuing the second yellow at all.
And it's, I guess, a common theme with us, especially over the first two games, that we've had a bit of a lackluster first half or a half where we haven't really been able to gel as a side. And then we've come out the second half looking a whole lot better. And I guess it was the case again against Burton, managing to score 3 goals in that second half. But on another day, it's a case that either we fluff all of our chances and really come away with nothing out of the game, or we go out and win 5, 6 or 7 goals to nil.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that particularly now, the fact that we are back playing championship football, it is time for these players in your likes of Klukas and Grzycki, and kind of the stars that we do have on show that are arguably above championship quality to really start to kind of dictate those contests and those parts of the game where they do need a spark. Then they should be the ones that really do kind of give us that X factor that is required.
Absolutely. Who would you have said was your man of the match? I mean, it's probably an obvious question.
Yeah, look, Hernandez, obviously with a hat trick, you can't really go past him. He also featured in the championship, or the Football League, rather, team of the week, which was no surprises there. I thought that Klukas was pretty decent and came close a couple of times, and would probably say that either him or Grzycki were standout performers as well. Although it was disappointing, I think Grzycki was maybe guilty of missing one of the best chances in probably his career, and certainly of his time at City.
Yeah, I can't quite understand or wrap my head around how he missed that one, but at least he put it right later in the match and did get off the mark with his first goal in City colours. We'll go on to the more negative news now, and that was the loss midweek to Wolves. And I suppose if you want to look for a silver lining out of that result, is Wolves are by far, I would imagine, the standout team in the championship, at least over the first 3 or 4 games or 3 games. And to only come away with a 3-2 loss isn't the worst of results. Obviously, I feel like the worst aspect of that loss was the injury to Hernandez. But just from a footballing and results point of view, how did you find that result?
Uh, if I'm honest, I think that the scoreline probably flattered us in the end. I think that Wolves are, as you mentioned, a serious contender, and I know that to be making such outlandish claims 3 games into the season is a very big call. But they really looked a quality side. They've obviously recruited extremely well and have had some big money signings. We saw that in the form of Neves' goal. But certainly. I thought the Wolves looked the part, and I really didn't see them featuring in the top 6 positions before the season kicked off. But I think they're going to cause some real damage to a lot of teams throughout the campaign.
Absolutely, and yeah, that was one of the standout goals, and it's quite amazing to see a player of that caliber playing in the championship. And you have to think that Wolves, as you say, it's a bit early to be locking them in as championship title contenders or certainties to go up, but it's one of those situations where you think any side that finishes above Wolves are very likely to themselves be promoted to the Premier League. So a 3-2 loss isn't too bad, and I think as was pointed out on Twitter, it was only our second loss in 28 games in the Championship at home. So from their point of view, quite a good result as well. On the player front, I guess Dawson got off the mark with a goal. Myler in the last minute, interestingly, stepping up for penalty duties. What did you make of Myler taking the penalty?
Well, initially when I saw the penalty being taken, because the feed wasn't so great, and I saw the screaming blonde locks, I wasn't sure that it was David Myler, but he put it away quite comfortably, and it does make me wonder why he hasn't taken more in the past, because as far as I can remember, David Myler has quite a good record from the spot. And it was good to see that he kind of did step up, if you will. Considering with what's left now, he is probably the most senior player at City as far as time spent in a black and amber shirt. And it was good to see him kind of relishing that leadership role, if you will.
And another one we haven't really talked about too much yet, but one who I really was quite keen to see play when we signed him was Michael Hector on loan from Chelsea. And he's really not put a foot wrong, I think, over the first 3 games. I know there's been a bit of criticism levelled at him after that Wolves game, but I think at the moment, especially with the state of our defence, that it's quite hard for the centre-backs to cover for the full-backs, who are themselves quite inexperienced in the game. And I don't necessarily think when either Dawson or Hector is caught out of position, it's necessarily their fault, but more so them sort of stepping in to fill the gaps left by either Aina or Clark. But, I mean, Hector, in a lot of ways, reminds me of Huddleston. And he sort of, especially against Burton, made his way forward a bit more and was pinging those passes around. And he was really looked quite impressive in his first 3 games at the club.
It's very easy to be greedy as a City fan, thinking who we have had in our defence in the last few seasons. And not too much has changed, because we have had Michael Dawson, as you mentioned, we've had Curtis Davies, we've had Harry Maguire. And we have looked quite solid in those positions. So the fact that we are now working with a very different system and a back four that is very much untried, with the exception of Michael Dawson, I would have to agree. I think Hector has come in and has offered us something, some kind of stability in a system that is going to take time for them to gel. Playing in that back four and not obviously having spent the amount of time in games together, and as you mentioned with the inexperienced left and right backs, I think that he has done a pretty admirable job, and it is still, as we mentioned before, very early days.
Yeah, I mean, a few people on Twitter already sort of asking the question whether or not we look at trying to make it a permanent deal, and I suppose at the moment the way that the club's being run, looking at a permanent deal from Chelsea is probably out of the question, only in the sense that it would generally cost a bit more than we'd be willing to spend. And from the point of view that we've already got him here on loan for the season, the owners probably wouldn't justify shelling out any money to make it a permanent deal. But who knows where we end up at the end of the season? Potentially, we might look at making that a permanent deal. He's a funny player because he's been on loan at so many clubs that he just seems it's almost like a rule as Michael Hector, that as soon as a club buys him, he has to go out on loan away from them, because I think he was at Reading for a number of years and only actually played for Reading once. He was bought by Chelsea and loaned back to Reading. So he's had a bit more of an interesting career than most players, but it'll be interesting to see at the end of the season how that ends up. I don't think there's too many other players that I can think of that really merit discussion. Perhaps Fraser Campbell and how he started his first few games at the club. I was actually quite surprised to see him start the game against Wolves. I didn't think his fitness was up to it. And he had that great chance, which was duly saved by the Wolves keeper. But what have you made of his first couple of games for us?
I think that Fraser Campbell has done, I guess, what Fraser Campbell does in the sense that he has offered a lot in his work off the ball. The kind of work rate that Fraser Campbell offers you is encouraging to see. Particularly as you mentioned before, he isn't at the probably the fitness level just yet that he'd like to be. And the fact that he does go out there with that kind of attitude and work himself into the ground has seemingly given Hernandez a much freer role, which has been nice because I think probably one thing that we spoke about a lot last season was Hernandez being stranded up top by himself quite a lot and not really being given the opportunity to showcase his attacking abilities all the time. And I think that Fraser Campbell, for the short stint that we've seen, has offered that kind of extra support that we've required from Hernandez. So, if anything, Fraser Campbell's first three matches have probably been summed up as providing a good supporting role, which is an interesting comparison because it was probably like that when he was partnered up with Big Dino. So I think it's been promising. I would probably like to see more goals from him, as we all would. But I'm really interested to see what kind of celebration he'll give when he does have that elusive breakthrough.
And I guess it's time to move on to the other sad news out of the game, which was the Hernandez injury. When he first leapt for the ball and landed and immediately gestured for the trainers, you knew it was pretty serious. And I guess the worry was, as soon as there was talks of either an Achilles or other sort of ligament issue, I knew it wasn't just going to be a strain or a bruising or whatever because it was such a clear impact injury as he landed, and it does sound like he's going to be out for the rest of the season. 8 months really isn't too good for him. Starting off from a point of view of losing him as a player for the season, it's just about the worst possible news we could hear and probably our most valuable player to lose for the season.
Yeah, certainly. I think I saw many people loading up on him, their sports bets accounts, when they had him for Golden Boot after the hat-trick against Burton. And as you said, he's proven in the championship, as City fans, we know what he's capable of. And we're certainly expecting, if we are to return or bounce back up into the Premier League, then it would probably be largely on the back of a big goal haul from him. What the season looks like now without Hernandez is going to be incredibly critical to see who we purchase and who kind of steps up and offers that avenue of 20 plus goals, because we do know that City without Hernandez is a very different side, particularly at championship level.
Well, overnight we apparently had a £10 million bid rejected for Zohore. Interestingly, claims that bid was actually put in before the Wolves game. Not entirely sure how likely that would be, but nevertheless, it at least shows some sort of intent to replace Hernandez. And Alan Nixon, who's a reporter for The Sun, I believe, and probably one of the more reliable journalists, ironically, despite who he works for, was asked the question on Twitter of what City are doing now that Hernandez is injured, and his response was one word, and it was panicking. So I do suspect that behind the scenes the club's probably scrambling a little bit to try and find a likely replacement. But 2 weeks left in the window. This is Ehab's favourite time of the window, when he can get all of his big deals done in the closing days of the window, and does tend to actually splash a bit of money around, because we have to remember we bought Grzycki, I think it was on deadline day, for £7 million, and supposedly had that bid for Saliba, or whatever his name was, accepted on the final day, but the paperwork mysteriously got misplaced. So there is sort of a bit of history and precedent for Ehab splashing a bit of cash at this time of the window. So we'll have to keep our eyes peeled and see what happens with it. But from another perspective, I wanted to ask you in terms of the contract situation for Hernandez, because obviously we were reported to have offered him a new deal a few days ago. And I'd wanted to get your thoughts on, from his point of view, perhaps, whether he looks at signing a new 1 or 2 year extension on his deal, just personally from his point of view, for a bit of security. Doesn't know where he's going to end up now that he's out for 8 months with injury. And then second of all, he might fancy, spending another season with us, getting those goals and kind of rebuilding his reputation after 8 months out, so then he can actually fancy a move somewhere else.
Well, I think the ball is largely in Hernandez's court now in many ways. Yes, it is a long-term injury and it will be a gamble for whoever decides to pick him up. But on the contrary, he has a World Cup next year that I'm sure he has his hopes set on in featuring for Uruguay. Whether that is too soon or not, only time will tell. But he does have the opportunity to sit back now and see where City finish. Find out if they are going to be a Premier League football club next year, or if they are a dwindling championship side, if we do finish mid-table or perhaps towards the lower end, and that's the pessimistic kind of side coming out, probably worst case scenario, then I guess that re-signing with City might not be the most attractive option for him. And I'm sure, given the fact that he's linked with anyone and everybody, every transfer window, it would certainly be an opportune time for him to jump ship. Whether he feels any kind of allegiance to return to City and repay them for re-signing him if they go that way after looking after him with this long-term injury, I'm not so sure. But I certainly think that Abel Hernandez, in many ways, from a personal perspective, this injury might not be such a bad thing for him.
Well, hopefully we haven't seen the last of him in a black and amber shirt, because it was quite sad in a way that his last standout performance for us was that hat-trick against Burton, really showcasing what he can do at this level especially. And even against Wolves, he was looking quite good. A couple of his plays with Campbell linking up really well, and I thought he'd started the season in really promising form. So it's a terribly heartbreaking injury to see, and all hopes that he can make an absolutely speedy and full recovery from the injury and get back to doing what he does best and scoring goals. But we'll move on now and talk about QPR, who are our opponents this weekend, and we'll start by sort of discussing a few of our, fondest memories, if we have any, of previous meetings with QPR. And I suspect, the obvious one that comes to mind for me is opening day of the 2014-15 season under Bruce, where we went away to QPR, and apart from the Snodgrass injury, which was obviously a bit of a dark lining to the game, came away with the 3 points courtesy of a James Chester header. But I think actually that season we had two good results against them, because we then beat them later in the season courtesy of Jelavic and Ndoye goals, and thanks a lot, at least in part, to a Joey Barton sack whack against Tom Huddleston, for lack of a better word, which really set us on our way. But do you have any other lasting memories of QPR clashes?
I do remember my last time that I actually saw at the KCOM was the Hull versus QPR, and I remember it was destined to be Charlie Austin scoring, and I think it was a 1-1 affair, and it was extremely disappointing because you just knew that it was going to happen, given the fact that we'd been linked with him. He'd all but signed, and then obviously failed the medical, and we had to watch on as QPR swooped, and then he became somewhat of a goal-scoring machine for them.
Yeah, especially against us, it seems.
Yeah, certainly. And the writing was on the wall. You knew he was going to score at some stage. I think we might have scored later on in the game to get ourselves back into it. But that's my only QPR memory. And I think every time I think QPR, I straight away default to the name Charlie Austin, and it brings back many unwanted memories.
Well, thankfully, he's not in the squad for them this weekend. It's going to be an interesting clash, because obviously they've not come into the season with the greatest of expectations placed upon them, and Holloway as a manager doesn't really instill a whole lot of confidence. But they've had an okay start to the season. I'm not actually sure how many games they've won so far, but it'll be an interesting one. They lost to Norwich this morning, though, so I think they beat Reading on the opening day of the season, it looks like. So they're sort of in a similar position to us. I think they've got one win, a draw, and a loss. So in some ways, a fairly even affair. But what do you make of it? And I guess is it in that sort of category of games that we really should be winning, or is it sort of away in London, just happy to take a point if we can?
I think that it is one of the games that we certainly need to be earmarking as a winnable game, given the fact that we are kind of a big fish in the championship, and certainly every club that we play against will look at us that way. I do think the fact that QPR have kind of spent some time in the Premier League in the last couple of seasons and do have a pretty decent pedigree. It certainly won't come easy in London. It's probably more likely to be a draw than anything, but I think it is certainly one of those fixtures that if we are serious top 6 contenders at least, we need to be looking for all 3 points here.
And I guess the big question is how we line up without Hernandez up top. Do we go the one option up top in Campbell, or perhaps bring in Diamande as someone to play off him, or even look at Henriksen as someone that can play up top or in a more advanced role? How do you see the striking lineup?
Yeah, I'd probably like to see Campbell and Diamande up top. I think that makes the most sense, given the way what we've kind of seen from Slutsky so far. Whether that is the case or not, I'm not so sure, but that would certainly be the way that I would be lining up. As you mentioned, Henriksen is the supporting option. It may be a nice time to try him higher up the pitch and see what attacking abilities he really does possess. Either way, I wouldn't be too fast. I think that the fact that Hernandez isn't there, I would rather settle on something sooner rather than later. And if they do decide to select Henriksen that high up, then it's probably something that I'd like to see continually for the next few games, at least until another striking option is brought in.
Yeah, Henriksen's a bit of an enigma at the moment. When he's playing further up the field as he did against Burton for patches, he let off a few pretty belting shots, and I think it was one that crashed off the post that Hernandez headed in for his first. But when he's playing a bit deeper, he really sort of goes missing in the game and doesn't really get stuck in all too often. So he's one that, I think it was Rick sort of described it as he's not a terrible player, but he just doesn't seem to offer a whole lot around the ground at the moment. So as you say, getting him involved a bit further up the pitch. I mean, when we bought him, he had a great goal-scoring record in Norway, I think. So, or was he? No, was he in the Netherlands? I think because he was with Janssen, I think I forget what they were, but he certainly came in with a very good goal-scoring and also assist record. So he seems to be more the sort of player who'll create those chances and create opportunities, rather than your crash and bash central defensive midfielder. So. It'll be interesting to see how we line up on the weekend. What are you predicting score-wise?
Look, part of me wants to sit on the fence and say 1-1, but even more of me wants to hope that we do have that elusive breakthrough. And I do think Campbell is good for a goal. So I'm going to say 2-1 City.
I'll be the same as Brad, who gave us his prediction before the game. I think he's on a bit of a hot streak at the moment. I think he had the 1-1 against Villa and also the 4-1 against Burton. So he's going pretty well with those. I wouldn't mind tipping a snatch and grab, probably 1-0 win, hopefully with Campbell. It'd be good to get a clean sheet as well. We haven't had one of those yet, so who knows? I think it'll be a pretty tight affair, so it might just be the one goal that splits it, I think. And just to round things off, we've got the League Cup game against Doncaster, Wednesday morning our time, I think. Yorkshire Derby haven't won there in a fair while, I think. Not a great record there, and they're doing well top of League One or near the top of League One at the moment, so it'll be an interesting one. And I guess with such a small squad, not sure how we'll line up. Do you suspect Slutsky will rest most of the squad and play a lot of kids, or I don't know. How do you see him lining up in this one?
Yeah, I certainly don't think the cup will be featuring high on Slutsky's to-do list. I do certainly fancy him to play a very young lineup against Doncaster in somewhat a game that will mean very little, albeit the fact that it is a derby and we haven't played Donny for quite some time. So I'm expecting certainly a young team, and I don't think it'll be a fixture that will leave all too much to the imagination as far as he's concerned.
I guess may as well ask for a score prediction in this one, but as you say, I think it'll be pretty low on the priority, and if we go out in this round, I think it's probably for the better. I don't know if we've got the squad to go on any sort of cup run, at least at this stage.
Yeah, look, I'm going to say, hopefully, fingers crossed, we sneak a 1-0 and it provides us an opportunity for younger players to play. But with that being said, if we were to bow out, it would be not too big of a deal. And I could actually see Donny getting right up for the game, given the fact that it is us and it is an opportunity for them to have another crack at their crosstown rivals, so to speak.
Absolutely. It'll be It'll be one to keep an eye on, I suppose. Always a bit of fun when there's a Yorkshire rival involved. And just quickly before we go, I wanted to round up a few of the transfer rumours. We've already touched on the bid for Zohore. I guess the other name that is worth a mention is Musa at Leicester, who obviously has the pre-existing relationship with Slutsky and has been mentioned once or twice on here already. But it's rare to hear a manager actually use a player's name in an interview in the way that he talked about the fact that we're interested in Musa this morning, or yesterday morning, I think it was. It probably suggests that it might actually be in the works, that there might actually be a decent chance of it happening. So what would you make of it if it could happen, and do you think it's a likely one?
Well, I think that in the very little time that we've been able to get used to Slutsky, he does seem to talk very little about players, as you mentioned. And the fact that Musa was linked earlier on in the window, and the fact that Slutsky does have that relationship with him, I would not be surprised if talks hadn't already taken place earlier on in the piece, and he has just been keeping a lid on things, so to speak. Certainly think from all sides he is available, and Leicester are open to releasing him, whether it be on loan. But I think preferring the buy clause. I think that it's certainly a realistic deal, and I would not be surprised to see it happen, given the fact that Slutsky does seem to enjoy working with Musa, and it seems to be reciprocated from all reports.
Well, it'll certainly be an interesting end to the window, and we'll be here to cover all of it. We'll likely do another deadline day special, as we did with the last window, given our propensity to bring in a fair few late signings. It'll certainly be an interesting end to the window, and thank you for coming on to discuss a whole bunch of games. We've had 2 games to review, 2 games to preview.
Not a problem.
And thank you everyone for listening in. Until next time, hopefully we can get a couple of wins before our next podcast. So until next time, come on, City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back 'cause you're out.